Okay, welcome to the video. SIG Guy here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to completely disassemble and reassemble the new SIG Sauer P226 X5 Legion. Let's get started. So before we get started, let's talk about the tools that are going to make this job a lot easier, okay? We'll start out with our armorer's block. For the slide, there's some pins we got to drive out and in, so we're going to need an armorer's block. And if you don't have an armorer's block, a roll of blue painter's tape works great, or any masking tape or anything like that. Small armorer's hammer. This has got a Delrin tip on one side, a brass tip on the other side. I use this Delrin side pretty much all the time. Once I'm getting really close to having the pin all the way home, that way I don't mark up my slide. We got a couple different punches here. This is my half punch. Okay, and this is specific to the roll pins that you can only see half of the roll pin. Okay, so this is the right tool for that job. These are available on sigguy.com. And then we have this punch here. This is a punch I usually use to start my pins. Basically, the pin can go inside it a little bit, so that way your punch doesn't slip off the pin when you're hammering it and scratch up your slide. This isn't necessary, but it makes the job a lot easier. On our grips, we got a T10 Torx, so we're going to need a T10 Torx. On our trigger, our adjustments use the 2 mil, so we have that. And then 2.5 millimeter if we want to remove our trigger shoe, which it isn't always necessary, but does make it a little bit easier sometimes. So that's the basic tools there. And then on our website, sigguy.com, I have all different kinds of tool kits available. So this one's specific to all of this SIGs. This one has a small punch in it, a 90-degree pick, the Sear spring screwdriver, and 3 different alignment pin punches, okay? Now I have 3 other kits, one for the 365, one for the 320, and one for the 22X, or the classic line of SIGs. The deluxe kit combines one tool from every one of those kits into one kit, so you don't need to buy any more than just the one kit. If you don't want to spend that much money to get the deluxe kit and you just have like a 22X and you want to, $20 less, then you can just buy the 22X kit, and that'll be more than fine to disassemble and reassemble your firearm. So you'll see how these work a lot better throughout the video. So that's basically all the tools that you're going to need. So let's move on to disassembly. Before we do anything to any firearm, we want to make sure it's a clear and safe firearm. So if there's a magazine installed, we're going to release our magazine, put that to the side, lock the slide to the rear, physically and visually check, make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine, check our breech face, look away, do the same thing again, chamber, magazine, breech face. We are working on a clear and safe firearm. The first thing we're going to do is remove our slide from the frame. In order to do that, we got to rotate this takedown lever. This takedown lever is new to SIG USA, but it's been around in the German master shop forever. To be able to rotate this, we got to get this little pin out of the way, okay? So in order to do that, we got to raise our takedown lever just a little bit so we can push in on that pin. Make sure it's nice and flush with this side here. We can lock our slide to the rear. Now we can rotate our takedown lever and remove our slide. 2 more things really quick before we get started. I highly recommend watching this video from the beginning all the way to the end. That way there's no surprises. You know what to expect. Things ain't flying out at you unexpectedly, or you're dropping stuff that you didn't notice you dropped and you might lose it. Secondly, once we get into more complicated stuff like the trigger assembly or the sear and hammer and all that stuff back here, take your smartphone with the video or the camera and make a video going all around it. Zoomed in as close as you can get it so it's as clear as you can see everything in there, and just go really slowly all around, all different angles, up, the bottom, the top, the left, the right, front, back. That way, if you're unclear how something goes back together, you can refer back to the video. Video's great, way better than pictures, because videos you can also zoom in and then you can slowly go forward and backwards, you know, frame by frame. It's like thousands of pictures all stitched together. I use it all the time and it has saved my butt many times, okay? So those two things really quick. So first we're going to disassemble our slide assembly here. So first we're going to remove our guide rod. Our guide rod is 4 pieces. We have our recoil spring here. We have what's called a buffer cap, and pay attention to how this stuff goes together and comes apart, okay? Because some of the stuff only goes in, it can go back together 2 different ways, but there's only one way that's proper. What I mean by that is our buffer cap, it's hollowed out inside here, and it's got a flat edge on the back here that goes up against our buffer spring, okay? So buffer cap, and then I like to lay things out in order here, chronologically. That gives me a, you know, an order to put things back together. Makes it a lot easier, a lot simpler. You're not installing things just to have to take them back out because you forgot to put something in before that. We have our buffer spring here and our recoil spring guide rod, okay? So that's that, and we have a barrel, bull barrel, 4.4-inch bull barrel. I went over all these details in my other unboxing video, so if you haven't seen that, that's a long one. Should have had an intermission in the middle of that one, but all right, so we have that stuff taken out. Next, let's move on to our rear sight. Okay, there's 2 Torx bits under here, T10s. Nothing's obstructing them. You don't have to take anything else apart to get to them. So we'll just break these loose here. The holes are different depths, but the screws are the same length. Okay, and I got my finger holding my sight plate so it doesn't fall off. So there's our 2 screws, same length. We got a little bit of a Loctite on them there, so when we put these back in, maybe some blue 242 back on those. And then here is our rear sight plate. Our front sight is a dovetail type sight, so we're not going to remove that. If you do need to remove it, I do have sight pushers available on sigguy.com. You basically put your slide in the sight pusher. I use these strips of Delrin to protect my slide so I don't get scratches or anything. And then you use the pusher to push in and out your sights. On the SIGs, there's a lot of rumors out there and everything, okay? These sights can go out either way. They can go out to the right or they can go out to the left. The dovetail on your slide is the same width all the way through, okay? There's no difference. On your sights, the reason why it's easier to install from the left to the right is because a lot of the sights have a tapered edge on the front part of the sight, which makes it easier to get started, okay? So that's why everybody recommends on the SIGs to go from left to right when you're installing them, okay? You can remove it from right to left if you want. You can remove it from left to right, right to left. It does not matter, okay? But when you install them, you want to go from left to right. And then check on the bottom of your sights. A lot of times there's an arrow that shows the direction that they need to be installed, okay? So we're not going to mess with that today, but we are going to move on to our extractor, which is right here. It's kind of the newer style. It's not like the old difficult to remove style that the Germans used. So there's no problem removing this. When we do remove this, you're going to need a half punch, okay? This is basically a round punch that has been milled where half of it's gone, okay? So I have these specially made that fit these pins perfectly. So you can only see half of that pin because the material from the slide is covering the other half of the pin. Now, I know what you're thinking. Let me get a smaller punch in there. Let me see. Let me get a smaller punch in there that'll fit in there, and we'll drive that baby right out of there. Well, guess what? Your punch is going to get stuck. This is a roll pin, okay, and not a solid pin. So it's hollow in the center. Your punch is going to get stuck inside that pin. Once it gets in a little bit and the punch can't bend anymore, it's going to get jammed in there, and then you're going to be in all kinds of problems, okay? So just use the right tool, okay? Using the right tool. Now, anytime you remove roll pins and install roll pins, SIG recommends you replace them. If you're doing this once or twice or whatever, it's no big deal. You can reuse the same pin. This here is there's less likelihood that you're gonna destroy the pin or damage the pin using the proper tools. So I've already had this apart and back together and you can't even tell. Okay, so if you do it right with the right tools, it'll be no problem. So this here is designed to go on the pin, the most amount that you can see of the pin anyway. And we're going to drive that right out the top. We're going to do that one first. And then there's going to be another pin in behind our extractor for our firing pin. It's the same exact setup as this. We'll drive that out as well to remove our firing pin. And also, if you do want replacement pins, which is a pretty good idea, if you're going to stop on the website and get this tool to do this job, you might as well just grab a couple pins and stuff while you're there. Just have extras, and maybe if you damage one, you have a new pin to reinstall. So we're going to use our armor's block, and I like to use my t-shirt that I've used for decades now, it seems like, so I don't mess up my slide at all. The Legion finish isn't the most durable finish, I guess we can say, so we want to be really careful when we're doing that. So this is going to come out through the top, so I basically kind of look where my hole is and try to kind of get my pin lined up with that. I'm going to use this pin here, get it on there, grab my hammer with the brass end, and give it a little whack. I felt it go in a little bit, so you can see we're already coming out. Kind of line that up. Now I can just put this in there. I got my finger kind of over the extractor so it doesn't go flying off. It is spring loaded. You just kind of tap this pin out. So there's our pin. This pin and the other pin are two different pins, so make sure we don't get them mixed up. This is the shorter of the two. Pull my tool out there, relieve the pressure, and then we got 3 parts in here. We have our extractor itself. I do sell these on the website as well if yours gets dull. We have this spring and a little buffer. I do not have these yet. I have the springs if it's the same one as all the other outer springs. I do not have the buffer yet, so I'll get looking for those as well. So make sure we don't lose those. If this keeps falling apart when you're putting it together too, you can put a little dab of grease around the buffer. It'll help keep it from falling out of that spring there. Next, we're going to be doing the firing pin retaining pin, which is right inside there. Again, we can only see half of it, so we're going to use our half punch. Get on our pin just like this. Just like that. And now you can see really how valuable having the right tool is, because you're gonna crush the edge of this pin trying to only hit part of it with a regular punch. Okay, so we're gonna line up that with our hole in our slide. We'll put our half punch on there. And I like to do kind of like one hit at a time until I kind of get recessed, in case I'm off the edge of that pin. I don't really want to be driving the steel punch into the side of my slide. One more. There, you can see how we're coming out quite a bit. And now our pin is recessed in there. And I can just drive the rest of it right out of there. So there's our pin. You can see it's a lot longer than the first one, so you can't really mix those up. If you do, you're gonna you're gonna know it at the end. So this is basically holding my firing pin in. It's not gonna come flying out, but it is spring loaded. So see how it just kind of came out a little bit. And now we can just push in on our firing pin safety here. We'll use some nylon punch, which is right here. And that should come out the rest of the way. Sometimes it's a pain in the butt. There you go. So you can see how it's kind of catching on the spring. So just kind of keep this pressed in. All I'm doing is pushing into my safety here. It's spring loaded. It's a plunger. You basically just push it down. Okay, so as I'm pushing that down, I can pull my firing pin out. There's my firing pin and spring. Now you can see the notches on this firing pin. It is pretty unique, so it only goes in one way. We'll go over that in a second. This spring here, you can kind of twist it and take it off. The spring's got a little bit of a small end here and a regular end here, so it only goes on one way. That smaller end basically goes around and clicks right into this groove here on the firing pin. See that? So there's that. And then our firing pin safety. It's basically two components. Again, pay attention how this stuff comes out because it only goes together one way. We got this piece here, the safety, and our spring. So our slide has been completely disassembled minus our front sight. Now would be a great time to do a good thorough cleaning. You can use pretty much anything you want. Just be mindful of the finish as it's not very durable like we said. So make sure your chemicals aren't too harsh or your abrasives aren't too abrasive, okay? Our channel here for our firing pin, basically that needs to be bone dry when we're all done with it. Same as like a striker cavity, same thing applies here. When you're cleaning your breech face, if any of them chemicals get down into the firing pin hole there, okay, we want to make sure that we clean them out with Q-tips and stuff in the firing pin channel. The firing pin itself, completely bone dry when we put this back together as well. Our optics here, if we decide to put an RDS on this or a green dot or whatever you're going to be running, our torque spec for the optic is 25 inch-pounds. And then our sight assembly, when we put that back on, the torque spec is going to be 15 inch-pounds, okay? So once we get this all cleaned up, we'll start the reassembly process. Now that we have everything all cleaned up and ready for reassembly, we'll reassemble our firing pin, the spring, the safety lever, and the safety lever spring. In our slide here, the cavity that the safety goes into, you can see that in the bottom there's a little drilled cavity for the spring towards this side of the hole, okay? That spring in relation to our safety, on the back side of our safety, has this little notch. Our spring's going to go into it just like that. And this is a little bit easier if you put the spring in first. Have the spring sit in that little hole just like that. And then install the safety. Just like that. Okay. So we'll let that sit here for a second. On our firing pin, we have notches here. These notches need to be facing up. So because our slide's upside down, they're going to be facing down. Okay. And once we get our firing pin installed in here partially, we can't see which way that those notches are. So what I like to do, I'll grab a Sharpie. And on my firing pin here, I'll have these notches facing like to the left. And then as close as I can on the other side, I'll put a line. And then I'll continue it on down the side. Just like that. So that way when I install it, that line's going to be facing straight up at me. And I'll know those notches are pointed straight down. Okay. If those notches aren't straight down, we won't be able to get the retaining pin through there. Because the retaining pin captures our firing pin like that. Okay. So we'll turn this around. Get this started kind of in the hole here. Oops, let me explain the hole here really quick. So our safety here, I'm going to push in on it a little bit and see if I can zoom in on this. This might be tricky. So you can see the safety there moving up and down the hole. If I push that all the way in as far as I can with my fingers, you can see that hole is almost all the way opened up. It needs to go a little bit more down so that safety is more inside this part of the slide. And that will open up that hole completely. Okay, for the firing pin and the firing pin spring to go in there. So I need to push that in just a little bit more. Okay, so that's why we're going to have to use like a punch to push this in because it's recessed too far for your finger to actually push it in. So here's our firing pin, notches facing down. Get that started. push in on our safety. Get our firing pin started in there. I'm going to use this little punch here to continue to push that in there. Make sure my line is facing straight up, close to it. And then I'll let go of my safety, and you'll see it's retaining my firing pin now. Okay, firing pin is spring loaded because of the spring obviously on the end of it. And then what we'll do is we'll rotate it to the side here. And when we rotate it to the side, you can see through the hole where our retaining pin is going to go. You can see an obstruction in there. To the left is the firing pin, and to the right is the spring. Okay, so what we're going to need to do before we push that pin all the way through is we're going to need to push in on our firing pin, and you'll see it open up that hole for the retaining pin. Okay, if we're back here and we're starting to smash our pin in there, that pin is going to hit up against the side of your firing pin, and you're going to be screwed because you can't hit it out from the other side because the firing pin's in the way. So you got to basically try to pull it out from this side. Okay, and it's a pretty tight fit. Just don't make the mistake. Okay, so make sure that we have our firing pin pushed in more than enough to get out of the way for that pin. And I got a little trick I'll show you how I do it. So when I do this, I use my half punch. Our pin goes from this side to this side. So I'm going to use my half punch and go in through the back side. Okay, and it's going to actually act like a slave pin. See, like right now it can't go in. It's hitting the firing pin. Okay, so if I use my punch and push in on my firing pin, now I can get that to go all the way through. Okay. Next, we'll install our retaining pin. The retaining pin is the longer of the two pins, so whatever end isn't mucked up from driving it out, I usually put that end in first. Okay, so I'll pull my alignment pin out a little bit to free up the hole. Okay, so I can get my pin started. And again, I do have replacement pins on SIGguy.com as well as factory parts for just about all SIG pistols on there. Okay, so with my pin started, I'll use my brass end here, and I'll start tapping that in there. And you're going to get to a point where it's in far enough to where it's holding my pin. I can remove this. It's not doing anything, and you can see my firing pin is still recessed. Okay, that means that this pin here is holding the firing pin in. Now I can kind of move this over to my armor's block. And we can kind of finish this up with the Delrin side here. So I'm in quite a bit. I'm not in all the way. You can still see it's kind of sticking out a little bit. And if we look at our other side here, you can see that the pin itself is not bottomed out in that hole, which all the way up. There's a little bit of a gap in there, so we can go in just a little bit more. So I'm going to use my 8th punch here. Get on my pin. Oops, strike one. Give it a little tap. You see that did move in. It's basically flush with the side now. And if we look at under here, we can see that pin is all the way bottomed out in the hole here. Okay, so that is how to remove and install your firing pin. Let's move on to the extractor. Next, we'll install our extractor. So we got our extractor itself. We have the spring and a buffer. So if your buffer is dry like mine is and it just keeps falling out of the spring, you can put a little dab of grease on your buffer, put it in the spring. That'll keep that from falling out. I'm really surprised this is as dry as it is because they usually come all greased up. On our slide, we have this little drilled cavity here in the back of our extractor cavity. That's where the spring is going to go, and that correlates with this cavity here on our extractor itself. Okay, this is an extractor. Just people confuse extractor and ejector. This is an ejector. This ejects the case out of the chamber or out of the breech area. this extracts it from the chamber, okay? So we'll take, and before we actually put any of that together, what we're going to do is we're going to start our pin. So our pin is the smaller of the two. It's going to go in through the top here. Again, whatever end is all mucked up, I like to have that going in first. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look underneath here. I'm going to tap this in slowly until I can just barely start to see the tip of the pin coming through here. I don't want it coming into the channel. I just want to be able to see the top of it, okay? I don't want it to interfere with my extractor as we're trying to put that in there. So we'll put this just like this. Give us a couple taps. And then as you can see, it's basically flush with the top of the hole there. So now we'll put our spring and our buffer in there. Just like that. We'll get our extractor. Make sure that this end goes towards this end. And then you want to make sure your extractor's got a nice sharp edge here, okay? If it's worn out, it's going to be dull. It's not going to be able to catch the lip of our brass as easy, okay? So if it is dull, it's time to replace it. Again, I have these on sigguy.com. So we're going to position that where it needs to be, just like that. We're just going to push it in with our fingers like this and start to tap that pin just like that. And then we'll finish it up by countersinking it with our 1/8 punch. Doesn't need to go all the way, okay? You don't want it coming out into here, but just countersink it a little bit. And there you go. That is how you install the extractor assembly. Next, we'll reinstall our sight plate. So we'll put our sight plate on here. We'll tip this upside down. And then what we're going to use is blue 242 on these. This is blue Loctite 242 thread locker, medium strength. This does not harden like rock hard like the red stuff does. It just makes it like gummy and prevents the screw from backing its way out, okay? So we'll put some blue Loctite on both of these. I'm not going to be taking this off for a while. We'll get those started in there. Get that stuff out of there. And then we'll just snug these up by hand and we'll torque them to spec. So like our spec is 15 inch-pounds. So we got this Wheeler inch-pound T10 on there. Bing, bing. There we go. That's how to reinstall the rear sight plate. And then while we're at it, a little coat of grease on your barrel. I put some on my hood as well, and then I put a little bit under here. You can see where the contact point is for the slide, where it's shiny there now. If you put some grease on there, I use grease because it stays put. Big, huge fan of grease, okay? It less wear on your parts, okay, when you're using grease. Stuff looks brand new even thousands of rounds later, okay? Clean off your guide rod. Basically, light coat of grease on here. We'll put our buffer spring in. Okay, just like that. We'll put our buffer cup on there, and then our buffer cup has a flat edge and a hollowed out cavity. The flat edge goes towards the buffer spring, just like that. Okay, and then our recoil spring, both ends are closed, so it really doesn't matter which end we put on there. We'll put that in there like that, and then we'll slide it into position just like that. Okay, so that is basically the complete disassembly and reassembly of our slide. Next, we'll move on to the lower part, so go grab yourself a snack and we will continue. Moving on to the lower, first we're going to remove our grips. It is a T10 Torx, so we'll get those out of there. And we're going to be very mindful of some little shims that are in here, the little rubber shims. So as we pull off our grips, they could either be stuck right here or still attached to the frame right here. There's a little rubber shim. See that? So I'd never seen these before. And when I did my complete disassembly and reassembly the other day, when I finished, one of these was laying just like that. And I'm like, where did this come from? Couldn't figure it out, so I set it aside. I was doing my functions check, and then there was another one that fell off. And I'm like, where did this come from? So I thought it was inside here under this. There's a shim underneath the locking insert. It's the only thing I could think of. But my buddies at SIG were all over it this morning, and one of them did reply back that there are shims used along here under our grips, and what that does is it, if it's got a rattle or a loose fit, it's going to shim that up and make it a tighter fit so it doesn't rattle or anything. So there's one on each side, so let's make sure we don't lose those. And the funny thing is I'd had these grips off quite a few times, and they'd never fallen out, or I never even noticed them. Yeah, see, this one here is stuck to the grip right here. So I'm going to set those aside because we want to put them back. Just make sure we don't lose them, okay, as long as the screws themselves as well. Our grip panels are the only thing that keep our mag well from falling off. There is no screw in the bottom of it like some of them that go into a modified mainspring seat with a threaded hole in the bottom. So basically this will just slide right off once we remove our grips. Next, what I would do is I would back off all my adjusting screws for my trigger, okay, before we start taking any of this stuff apart. So basically I'd put this in front here. I'd back off mine's already backed off. I would back off my trigger pull weight adjustment screw and then just kind of put it in like a half a turn because it interacts with our pin here and we don't want any pressure on our pin when we're trying to put this back together. So back this all the way out, run it in quarter to half a turn. Same thing with our over travel adjustment screw that goes in through the bottom here. It goes into the backside of our trigger. And then up top here, we have another Allen screw right here. Okay, so right in through the top here. This here will back out our pre-travel screw. So all those are 2mm. We're going to back them all out. That way, when we go to reinstall our trigger, it's not fighting those screws because those screws are going to push against the trigger or the frame and stuff, okay? So back all your screws out. Then what I would do is I'd take your cell phone, take all kinds of video at this stage here, you know, everywhere, every little nook and cranny. Then we'll take a little bit apart and then take more video, take a little bit more apart. Keep taking video throughout the whole process. The more the merrier, okay? That way if there's any reassembly issues, you don't know quite sure how this spring was orientated or where this part came from, you'll be able to look through your videos and find the solution or the answers to those, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is remove our manual safety, okay? Because with this out of the way, we can get our trigger bar out of there and everything, take our trigger out. So this is a 2.5mm. So we'll grab our 2.5mm. So we have this little detent spring type deal, weird looking spring, the through bolt, and then 2 levers, one on each side, okay? So there's 4 components. See how that spring works? It acts as our detent. So put your safety up like that, okay? And then we're going to take out this through bolt, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. It's not going to thread all the way out. It's going to thread, you know, a couple turns and then stop. So once it moves freely like that, we're just going to grab a hold of it. Make sure we put our finger over this spring so it doesn't go flying. And then we'll twist and pull our through bolt out. Okay. So this is our through bolt. And this is the bolt that your strut will hit on a lot of SAOs. That's why when the SIG armor came up with his super strut, it redesigned the geometry to not interfere with our cross bolt. Okay, so that was a common problem with SIGs. I didn't check this one. I'm not sure if it even hits it or not. But there's our through bolt. And then we'll take a magnet here and we'll get our little spring off. Okay, there's our little spring. We'll set that aside. We'll take this side out here. It's just basically going to rotate and come out. It hinges on this pivot pin in the back. In through a... Oops, the other side fell off. Little cavity here. Both sides are the same thing. So we'll take out the one side. The other side will fall out. We'll put that here. And there, our manual safety's out of the way. If you wanted to take more pictures and stuff, release your hammer. You don't want your hammer back when we're doing this. So take all your pictures, your videos, get underneath here and everything. All these little nooks and crannies. So that's how you take apart that stuff. Next, we'll start working on the trigger assembly. Next, we'll take out our takedown lever. So we just kind of rotate this. I kind of push on it from this side with my finger as I'm rotating it and I'm pulling it out. Okay, we'll set that aside. And then our locking insert, that should kind of just slide up and out. If it's giving you a little bit of a hard time, this groove here on each side, this pin rides in it. Okay, if you look straight down, you can see that pin going through. Sometimes you got to take a small flat tip and maybe rotate your pin a little bit and get it nice and loose to where it's not binding up, and then that'll slide right up and out of there. So on this here, we have a little spring. Okay, there's our slide catch spring. And if you need replacement springs, it's spring 34 on the website under the 22X parts. So a lot of these parts I do have on the website, not all of them because this is relatively new. I'm not sure if that buffer in the spring for the extractors, I know the extractors will fit this, but I don't know if the spring and the buffer will fit this. So I got to do a little bit of research before you start getting parts specific to this one on the website. So with that locking insert out, now we can take our trigger bar spring off. This is our trigger bar spring. Note how it's orientated. It's facing up. Okay. Sometimes people put these on backwards, and then your grip squishes the trigger bar spring as you're tightening your grips, and then your trigger doesn't work properly, and they don't know why. So again, all video and everything, especially after we got our locking insert out of there, you want to take a lot of video of this guy down in here where that spring is. It's hard to see, but on the side where that spring goes down more specifically, and we'll show you why when we take this out. Okay, because this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces, not counting the trigger bar spring when we pull it out, okay? So our trigger bar spring, I'm basically going to grab the bottom of it here and kind of rotate it outwards because of the way this hooks onto our trigger bar. And make sure you have a good hold of it so your finger doesn't slip and it goes flying across the room. Ask me how I know that. But here's your trigger bar spring. It only goes on one way. So the longer leg goes towards our grip. Okay, the shorter leg goes towards the trigger bar. So we'll set that over here. Now we can start pushing out our trigger pivot pin here. Just like that. That's what captures our slide catch lever. Okay, right through that hole right down here. So we got that off there. And then we can actually just push this pin all the way through. This is the large punch in the kits. It's made specifically for this pin here and some other pins in the 320. So this pin here it's a little different than our classics in the past, okay? The X5 that USA came out with, same pin. And what I mean by that, it has this little notch in it, which typically was on the left-hand side. When you put it back together, now it's going to be on the right-hand side, okay? It's got this little notch here that interacts with our takedown lever. That goes on the left-hand side. And then you have your two notches in the bottom here that our locking insert interacts with. Okay, so we'll go over how to put that back in once we get to that point. Actually, there's going to be another piece in here too. So I said 6 pieces, so just be careful, okay? So when we pull our pin out here, now our trigger's just all floating around. And when I first tried this, I took off the trigger shoe. It was pretty easy getting it out, but it was a lot more difficult putting it back in. So I recommend leaving your trigger shoe on when you're doing this. So I'm just going to kind of rotate it towards this side over here so my trigger bar clears the frame. The frame here has this lip that the trigger bar is underneath when it's installed. So we got to get it out from that lip so we can push it up by it, okay? So just be very careful because this might fall apart on you. Make sure we don't lose anything. So I'm just going to set this down really quick. And this is the other piece I was talking about that you could lose, that shiny piece in there. It's like another little shim. A little horseshoe-like plate. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but don't lose that. We'll set this aside for a second. Our trigger bar. Now, what I would do, take your video all around this thing before anything moves, okay? So you know exactly how it all goes back together. So we can just slide our trigger bar out, just like that, just on a pin. This has the pin, this has the hole. Okay, just like that. Take our trigger bar off, put that aside. So on here, we can take apart these 2 pieces. Okay, so we have the main portion here with the trigger. There's nothing here that's going to fall off. This has our pre-travel adjustment screw. Okay, that pushes against the frame. So that's why we're going to, I'm not sure it's up against the frame, but maybe it pushes against our locking insert, like right here or something. I'm not sure exactly where that pushes against. We'll see if we can figure that out when we put it together. So we have the main portion here, okay? And then we have 3 pieces on here. We have this portion here, which has our trigger pull weight adjustment screw in it. Okay. Then we have this portion here. Again, taking pictures of how all this stuff faces and everything. Because if you drop this and you're trying to figure out which way this stuff goes back together, see how the spring is designed a little differently. This end has a little bit of a bend on it. This end's shorter. Okay, so the shorter goes towards the front. The bend portion goes facing us. And it's got this little teardrop portion here. This is what our trigger pull weight, as we're tightening it up, it pushes against this. Okay, and as it's pushing against that, don't forget our trigger pivot pin goes through these holes. So that's why you can't move your trigger pivot pin as easy when you have your adjustment all the way out. Anyway, so we have all these pieces here. Don't lose them. So before we take any of this apart, you can see there's a lot of tension on our hammer because of our mainspring here. It's got a hefty spring in here from the factory. I don't know if it's a 20-pound spring or what. But we're going to remove this first, our spring, our strut, and our mainspring seat. And then all these components will kind of loosen up and they'll be a lot easier to remove and install. So what I do on this, typically you can kind of grab this. See how it wants to bend out? Sometimes you can grab on this and just pull it out if it's got a lighter spring on it. With a heavier spring, it's a little bit more difficult. So what I do is I take some painter's tape. That's kind of like 4 or 5 layers of it. And I'm going to stick it right here over my frame, just like that. And then I'm going to use a flat tip right in here, as close to the mainspring or the seat as possible. And then just kind of pry out, covering this with my hand. That way it doesn't go flying. So we have our parts here, and I'll explain them how they interact once we get this taken apart. So we'll just pull our strut out like that. We have our strut and our mainspring. Okay, mainspring will come off of there. And then on our mainspring seat, on our frame here, we kind of got these like 2 anchor points. That kind of, the mainspring seat sits just like that when it's locked into place. So basically we got to get it up out of those notches there to get it to come out. And that's kind of the easy way to do it with the screwdriver there. And then with the painter's tape, you're not screwing up your frame or anything. So Now that we have that out of there, let's continue on to remove all of this in here. So now that our hammer is just kind of floating around there, it won't release until you release it with the sear. So if you want to put it back up, you basically got to pivot the sear. Anyway, it doesn't matter if it falls back. So what we're going to do here is the first thing we're going to do is our sear spring screwdriver. Okay, this one's got a notch in it. Again, available on sigguy.com. You can buy this separately, or it comes in the 22X kit, and it comes in the deluxe kit as well. So this is your sear spring way down in here. You can see one leg of it is kind of sitting right down here. Okay, and then the other one is underneath this pin right here. Okay, so the easy way to get that in and out, more specifically putting it in, is using the sear spring screwdriver. So if I grab my screwdriver and I put that spring through the notch there, and I just kind of move it over to the right, it's going to come out and above that little knot, the post there. Okay, so now there's no tension on that, and then all these pieces here will move freely. Okay, so that we have that off there, we're going to use our medium pin alignment tool, which is specific to this size pin here. And the way I'm going to do this is this AX3 trigger system is kind of different, more specifically like the safety lever and the sear, more specifically the sear. The way it's designed, you kind of have to put it in backwards from the original 226 stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this pin out, okay, all the way through like that. We'll set that aside. And then as I'm starting to pull this pin out, the first thing that's going to release is my ejector. Okay, because that pin goes right through that hole. We'll set that right there. And then as we pull it out a little bit more, basically our sear spring, that guy right there. We'll set that aside over here. And then get a Q-tip here, clean one. And again, we're taking pictures of all this stuff, right? Before we take it all apart and everything, so we can tell how it goes back together. So I usually just jam a Q-tip in there. And as we pull this out a little bit more, it will release our sear. Okay. And then the last thing is our safety lever. Pull that out. And there's our safety lever. Again, taking pictures of all this stuff so we know exactly how it came out and how it goes back together. Here's our sear. It's got this little different leg and stuff on it and these little nubs. So we can't put this back together the way we normally put stuff back together. So I'll show you how to put this back together. It's kind of like reverse than what we're typically used to. Lastly, it's just the hammer. So we use our large. This pin can go out through either way. Hammer pivot pin. Again, all these pins I have on sigguy.com. If yours is worn out and you need replacements. This comes with a new style takedown lever. I don't sell that one separately. Anyway, so when we pull our pin out here. Now when your hammer's in there, there's a little spring, the reset spring. So it's basically like you could hang your frame off of it because it's around your hammer. So don't pull your hammer straight out. Look in behind there, push it in a little bit. Like push it in and then slide it forward and then pull it up. Because it's going to like go in and hook onto that spring. And this is the spring I'm talking about right here. So if you've mangled this spring and everything, I have those springs as well. You basically drive out the pin. It's got grease in there. I'm not taking it out because it's a pain in the butt. But there's a little pin right there inside the manual safety pivot point. Just drive that pin out. That spring will come out, and then that block will come out as well. It's a little Delrin or something, plastic block, rebound block. So that's that part. Now let's remove our magazine release. So our magazine release is by far my least favorite thing to do on these. It's specific to these X5s. If you've watched my video, you should probably go watch that, on removal of this type of mag release. It's not like the AXG. It's a similar style, but it's made a little bit differently, and you can't use the razor blade method, all right? If you use the razor blade method, you're going to end up breaking your razor blade tip off inside here. Now you've wedged another piece of metal in there that needs to be in a cavity that needs to be empty, and for the wedge to come out. Anyway, so do not use the razor blade method. I'm just going to get the oil off of here so I can put my tape on there. Kind of put my tape here behind it. So that way when we push this up, you see that little hole right in here. We're going to use a punch. Not this punch. We're going to use, you can either use a small Allen wrench, which I'm going to use, or you can use something like this T-pin. So you push that up, push your mag release in so it exposes that hole. You push your T-pin or whatever else in here to move the wedge, to remove the wedge, move the wedge on the stop here away from the magazine release, and then we can pull that up and out of there, okay? You'll understand this all a lot better when we get that out of there and I show you how it works. That's why I recommend watching everything first before attempting this stuff. So in my other video, the easiest way to take this apart is get your armor's block. Use your armor's block to push the mag release up. And then when you push your mag release up, you'll notice on this side, there's this little notch right here. Kind of looks like a notch for your fingernail. So I'm going to put my fingernail in there and pull out as I'm pushing that little detent inside there in. This is kind of, you need 3 hands to do this stuff. So I had that pushed in. I had my fingernail underneath that. So let's take it apart so you can actually see these pieces. Don't lose that little spring. Okay, so you got a mag release spring there. So when this is put together, and I've done a million videos on these magazine releases, so you can watch those as well. But this little piece here, see how it's shaped like a V? We're pushing this piece in with, I used a little Allen wrench through that hole. It's pushing in right on the side of it like this, okay? What this is doing, this little notch here up top, it's actually captured underneath this little ledge right here. You can see the hole. So that little leg of that wedge, it's just like that. So when we put the Allen wrench through this side here, it pushes that little wedge out and it allows it to slip up by the mag release itself. This is in there so deep and it's in there so tight that the way I usually walked it out with the Allen wrench, it won't walk it out. So you got to basically do what I just did, is, you know, push down on it with the armor's block there, pull up on the catch. This is called a stop. Everybody calls it the wedge. Okay, your magazine release stop or catch or wedge. You got to pull up on this as you're pushing in with, you know, unlocking the wedge from the mag release itself, and then it'll go, and then release all the tension. You know, pull your, don't let your magazine release when you're pushing it in the frame in here. You know, it's spring loaded. So when you have your Allen wrench inside that hole, if you were to let go of that magazine release, it's going to pull this Allen wrench real tight against your frame. You could scratch your frame up, okay? So always keep pressure on your mag release until that Allen wrench or whatever you're using as a tool, make sure you get it out of that hole before you release your magazine release, okay? So there you go. That is the 226 X5 lower completely disassembled, minus our little rebound spring there and the little plastic part there. I forget the name of it, but I'm not taking that out. It's not difficult. It's just unnecessary to take that out if it's in good condition. So as you can see, taking this apart, mine was pretty much grease clean. You know, it's grease free, nice and clean. I've already cleaned everything up. When I do my videos, I don't want all that grease and stuff all around. So even when I reinstall this, I'm not going to put all the grease over it because I plan on doing a couple more videos. I will grease it up and everything once I determine I'm going to go and shoot it again. So throughout this process, just make sure you're paying attention to what is greased. That way, if you're cleaning and everything, you can reapply grease when you're putting it back together. So there you have it. That's all of the 226 X5 lower disassembled. We'll take another quick break, clean all this stuff up if you haven't cleaned it up, and then we'll start the reassembly process. So now that we're all cleaned up and we're ready to reassemble, we got our order all set out here because of the way we took things apart and we laid them all out. The first thing we're going to do is our mag release. So we're going to take our spring. Our spring goes in this little cavity here, just like that. And then this goes on the left side if you want to be if you're a right-handed shooter. This is ambi, by the way. You can put it on the other side. We're going to put this through the hole just like this. We're going to make sure that our spring stays put. We're going to kind of pay attention on this side as we're watching that come through. And then once we get it, we can push it through just like that. Hold pressure on it. Our wedge only goes in, I don't know if it can go in backwards or not, but don't put it in backwards. So the open portion of the V is facing out. So put it in there just like that. You can see the open portion of the V right here on the inside. That's going to lock into the cavity on our mag release. So we'll push this in. You'll hear it click. And then we can let go, do a functions check, make sure it's retained, okay, which it is. And there you go. It's as easy as that to reinstall the magazine release. So next we'll reinstall our hammer. Again, a nice healthy coat of grease on both sides of this. We're going to basically, you have a pin here in the back of it, right here. That spring needs to go above that pin, okay? This spring right in here. So basically we're going to fish this down inside there. We're going to put it underneath that spring. We're going to drop it. We're going to put that in there underneath that spring, pull it up, and then you should be able to hang your frame because it's on that spring. If your frame ain't hanging like this, then it's not above that pin on the hammer. So then we're just going to line up these holes here. You can use your pin alignment tool to go through there, just like that. Okay, this one's not too hard to put together without a tool. But then you can use your pin alignment tool as a slave pin. Oops. And you can push your pin alignment tool out with the factory pin just like that. That's the beauty of these things, especially when the pins are very small. And on our hammer pivot pin, it kind of works with our trigger bars. Our trigger bar rides on it, so to speak. So on this side here, we basically want it flush. And on this side here, we want it sticking out just a little bit, okay? It's going to move around throughout the process, but when we go to put our trigger bar and stuff in there, make sure that that's the position that that pin is in, okay? So that's how we reinstall our hammer. Now we'll put our other components, the sear, the safety lever, the sear spring, and our ejector in. So if you're familiar with the older classics, basically you would put your ejector in first, you know, boom. And then you would put your sear in, then you'd put your sear spring in, and then you would drop your safety lever down in on the side. Because of the way the sear is designed, it's got all this gnarly stuff hanging off the side of it. We can't slide our safety lever down in on the side here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to work from this side and go this way instead. So what I found very helpful is I got this little vise here. It's actually like a third hand. And I can just kind of put my frame in here. I got another piece of t-shirt there so it doesn't muck up my frame. Let me move some of this stuff out of the way so we can get you in view. And it kind of holds everything while I'm doing whatever I need to do back here. So on our safety lever, this portion here is going to face forward, and this is up. You got these two little legs here that go on the bottom facing to the right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our pin alignment tool. We're going to put that through the hole here, just like that. And then we're going to put our safety lever on there, just like that. I'm going to fish it down so we can get in between the hammer and the frame. Come on. Just like that. See how that's in there? It's got to go in between the hammer and the frame with our pin going through it. This part here is flat. This is what your slide usually crashes into when you're putting your slide on. So that's the way that goes. And this is the beauty of these toolkits, because it makes it so easy to do. Trying to do all this stuff with little pins and stuff like that, it's almost impossible. So now we're going to take our sear, and what I like to do is I like to stick a Q-tip down in it. Make sure we're not blocking the hole here, more towards the front of it. Our sear goes just like this. All this gnarly stuff faces the right on this side over here. Okay, we're going to drop it down in there. We're going to kind of go past below the pin and then bring it back up to the pin. So I'm going to pull my pin out a little bit, just like that. How easy is that, right? Without these pins and stuff, this stuff is not as easy as it looks. So I'll remove my Q-tip now. Now I'll take my sear spring. I'm going to pull this out just a little bit so I got room to put my sear spring in there. Put that in there. And then we'll push our pin in to hold our sear spring. And this is what we look like so far. So we got our safety lever on the right. Then we put our sear in. Then we put our sear spring in. And then all we have left is our ejector. And our ejector doesn't ride on a post like the older classics. That's why you got to do it the opposite what I'm doing it now, because this has to go on a post first. Okay, there's two holes in this, one for the pin and one for the post. There is no post on this one, so you can get away with doing this backwards. So now we're going to slide this in on this side here. I can't see where my hole is. There. There we go. Okay, so everything's all back to where it should be. We can get rid of this now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our pivot pin, which is this guy right here. We're going to use that to push out my alignment pin. You just kind of wiggle this until it shimmies its way through there. Okay. Then we'll just make sure this pin is flush with this part of the rail here. because that slide is going in this channel here. So we want to make sure our pin is recessed there. Same thing over here, recessed over here. And then what we'll do is I'll take our sear spring screwdriver, lastly, and we'll take this leg here, the one that's pointed up. See, I'm going to do this really close on the camera. This one here, that post below it, we're going to move this in, push it down, and work it right under the post just like that. Okay, nothing to it. Now with that sear spring hooked up and everything, we ain't got to worry about any of this stuff falling out. It's got some tension on it. It's going to stay put. Next, we will install our strut, our mainspring, and our mainspring seat. So right now my hammer's back, okay, and it won't go forward because of our sears installed. So all we do is on this side here, this is our sear, that little gnarly leg coming off of it. So if we just take this here and move it forward like that, it'll remove, or it'll release the hammer. So as we're pulling the hammer like this, just pull that forward and our hammer will come up, okay? So while we're holding that up, our strut. Now, a lot of people screw up the strut, okay? That pin that we showed you that went through it, that basically needs to go right in this notch here, okay? So this needs to be really far back on that hammer and up in there as far as possible. So our hammer has a slit in the middle of it, and I should have showed you that when it was out. Okay, so I'm editing the video right now, and I really want to show you a close-up of this hammer. This is a different hammer and a different strut than we're talking about in the video. Same principles. So this is our hammer. This is the slit that we're talking about in the center of it, and there's a little pin in there, okay? That little pin needs to go right in the valley here of our strut, okay? So when we're sliding this up into our frame, we're going up into the middle of the hammer, right in the slit there, and we're nesting that pin right in that valley, okay, in the notch on the strut there, okay? So what this is going to do is when we push our hammer back, that pin is pushing down on our strut, okay? That's what's making the strut go up and down. You see the spring compressing, okay, when it's all installed correctly. What happens is most people, they miss that pin and they kind of get the strut going in here like this, okay? And it will go together and everything, but then when they go to exercise the hammer, it's not pushing at all on the strut. Nothing's happening. They basically put their whole pistol together, go to pull the trigger and all that stuff, and nothing's really working. And I get this all the time when people replace the strut with the SIG Armor's Super Strut, which we have on the website as well. But you got to really make sure that when you're sliding this into the hole, you're as far back as possible, so that way you're connecting with that pin inside the hammer, okay? So I just wanted to show you this up close while I'm going to insert this into the video and continue on. But basically what I'm going to do is when I put my strut in there, this leading edge here, I'm going to kind of ride it along the edge here. This edge right here. As I'm putting it in there, it's going to ride along that edge, and that's going to make sure I'm as back as far as possible, okay? Because this will install, and it will install incorrectly, and then your gun won't work right. So I'm looking underneath here, and I can see that hammer going in between the slot and the hammer, okay? And I'm riding along that back edge as I'm rotating it, and I'm pushing it up into there as far as possible, okay? Which it is. And then if I want to do a kind of a little test here, I can push down on my hammer, and it's pushing down on my strut. Okay, if your strut isn't being pushed down, that means that pin is not pushing against your strut. That means you're in the wrong position. Okay, so while I'm holding that up in there like that, I'm actually going to take my tape, put this back here again, and then we'll take our mainspring seat. Now, I usually put my finger through the frame like this, like I'm firing like a trigger, okay, through a trigger guard. And then I'm pushing up on this with my thumb. and I'm kind of holding this straight so it doesn't go popping out, okay? This one's a little bit tough because it's got that 20-pound spring, so it might take a couple attempts. Maybe you'll get one leg of this on the anchor point, and the other one you can't get on there, so just take it all back apart, try it again. It's got to kind of be like in one fell swoop, okay? Just like that. Okay, and we remove our tape. And then what we'll do is when we pull our hammer, you should see your strut moving. I don't want to caulk it all the way, but it is clearly pushing down on my strut. I'm in the right position. If your strut's doing nothing and your hammer moves pretty freely, you're not in the right spot. You got to take it out and do it all over again. Also, you can put some grease on your strut down here where the spring's going to be rubbing on it. Okay, and you can kind of see how my spring is looking like a macaroni, like a noodle, bending there with an elbow. The SIG Armor's mainspring super strut, or excuse me, the SIG Armor super strut corrects this mainspring issue, if you want to call it that. When you have his strut installed, it actually, the seat here where the spring contacts it, it's at a little different angle, and it keeps our spring nice and straight, which reduces friction, which makes it a much better trigger pull. So kind of a side note there, but so that's how we install our strut, spring, and mainspring seat. Okay, so moving right along, next we're going to reinstall our trigger system. So remember, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then this here, if we count that as a trigger part, 7. What we're going to use is some grease. And I'm a big fan of this Tetra grease. It usually doesn't separate, but it's been sitting in there for probably a year. So we'll just knead it up a little bit here. So what I'm going to use this for is I'm going to put it on my little shim plate here. And that goes right down in here, but nothing's capturing it other than the locking insert and part of the trigger there. So it does slide out because mine's all nice and clean. If yours has grease on it, it might stay put a little bit better. Anyhow, I'm going to put some grease on mine there just to make sure that it stays in place, okay? So when we put this together, if yours fell apart, you can take all this stuff apart, by the way. There's always a way to put it back together, so don't worry about that. I won't leave you hanging on that stuff. So on our trigger here, we're basically going to take our spring. There's a longer leg and a shorter leg. The longer leg has this little curve on it. So we're going to take the longer leg. We're going to put it up inside this piece here. Okay, that piece there looks like a little ramp or a teardrop. Okay, so when we have that like that, we can kind of pinch it. And then we're going to put it over this post on this piece. Just like that, with the spring and that ramp below. So a little ramp below the front portion here. The little spring pointed down over here. And this little spring, what this has to do with is your pull weight adjustment. Okay, this all works together. So when we put these two pieces together, we want this spring here, the leg, to be underneath this post right here. Okay, so your spring is going to be just like that. We don't want it above it like this. We want it like that. All these V-type springs, they got to be retained on both sides somehow, okay? That's how the spring works. If it's like this, and then this part's pushing the spring, this here ain't going against anything, so the spring's kind of pointless. It's got to be in between two fixed points. So when we put this on here, basically you get the eyelet started there, and you see how the spring wants to go above that post. I'm going to use my fingers here and rotate this piece to kind of keep that spring pointed down as I push it underneath that post, just like that, okay? So once it's underneath this post like that, it'll basically stay somewhat by itself, enough for us to put that, drop that down inside our frame and get our pin started. So now that we have that part assembled, we can take our trigger bar, nice little glob of grease here, little glob of grease on our pivot pin there, put our trigger bar on it just like that. and then we'll drop this whole thing down into the frame as an assembly. So when we're putting our trigger bar in, we basically want to come through the hole like this at kind of an angle, and then have it slide right up in place there. Okay, and like I mentioned before, with your hammer pivot pin, you want it sticking out a little bit on this side, because see how that rides up against our trigger bar? Okay, we don't want this part here pushed through the other side. We want it pushed through this side. And on this one here, this is what it looks like on the back side. Okay, this portion here is on the inside, not the outside of the frame. Okay, so we'll put that back on our, you can't do this separately. You can't put this in and then the trigger. You got to kind of do it all as one piece. Okay, so we'll kind of put this in, like I said, kind of like start it like that. Rotate our trigger around to get it inside our frame. We're going to put our shoe down through the hole. Like that. Drop it down softly because you don't want that piece to come apart. If it does fall apart, you got to take it back out, put it back together, put it back in. Then we're going to get our trigger bar so it's kind of positioned where it needs to be. Up on the side here like that. I'm going to kind of hold that with my finger while I kind of rotate this stuff around. And I can see my holes are just about all lined up. We'll take our large alignment pin, put it right through there. And there you go. So this is exactly why we're taking videos and pictures of all this stuff before we take it apart. That way you can see exactly how like the spring goes back on, how it interacts with the other parts, and then there's no confusion, okay? So while we have that there like that, what I'm going to do is I'll take some grease and I'll put it on this little shim here. And I can see the scratched part here must have been up towards the trigger. So I'll put it back like, oops, wrong side. Doesn't matter, I'm sure if there's grease on there. So I'll put grease on the bottom side here. That way it'll kind of hold it in place. This has got to go in before your locking insert, okay? So we'll drop it right down in there like that. And then grease, see how it'll kind of stay there by itself, it won't slide out. So the grease is our friend, it's like glue. So there, once all that stuff's in there and that's all lined up, I can see my trigger, the front portion there is flat against the front part of the frame. I can see my Allen screw right through here, through the hole. Okay, so if all this stuff is misaligned, you won't be able to see any of that stuff. And then this is in here nice and loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pivot pin now, and the slot with the flat head on it goes towards the right, and then our notches in the bottom go kind of 7 o'clock. We can kind of take this out really carefully. You can even leave it in if you want to use it as like a slave pin. I'm going to kind of rotate this. On this pivot pin, it helps if you kind of rotate it as you're pushing it in, okay? And then we want that notch here to be facing straight up. I'm going to push it in flush right there, which doesn't matter yet. And see how that one's horizontal? That's the resting position of that pin, but we need to go a little bit more because we got to put our slide catch lever in, which is retained by that pin on this side. So we'll get our slide catch lever. And I make sure you put this in there right. This textured part faces out. So I'm going to slide that in there just like that. Kind of line up my hole and push my pivot pin through it like that. Okay, now it's hinging on that pivot pin. We can just drop it right down into place, just like that. Okay, so I've basically just set this all up on my little vise there. I want to kind of go over a couple things here. Nothing's locked into place permanently, so basically I'm trying to get my locking insert in as quick as possible so none of this stuff falls apart, okay? So on our locking insert, we have our slide catch lever, which is right here. This needs to be all the way up against the side of the frame, okay? All the way up like that, because our locking insert goes right in this groove right here and right in this groove over here, okay? You can see our locking insert has two sides, this side here and this side here, okay? So your slide catch lever always wants to kind of migrate over like that And then now your locking insert's trying to go in over here, and it's not going to go in. It's going to go in partially. You're going to try to hammer it in, all kinds of crazy shit. You don't want that. So you want to make sure it's all the way on the side, just like that. Okay? So that's part of it. And then our grooves in the bottom of our pins, it needs to be at kind of like 7 o'clock. Okay? So when you start all of this, just kind of make sure that we're horizontal right here. Okay? Let me zoom back out here. Make sure we're kind of horizontal here. And then this side here needs to be flush. Okay? That way those grooves are lined up exactly perfect with our locking insert. So we'll make sure our slide catch lever is where it needs to be. Firmly against this side over here. We're going to make sure our spring is laying in there nice and flat. We're going to hold the spring with our finger. And then this portion here goes right along the top of this portion here of your trigger. And kind of skates right down it, okay? Like a little ramp. So we'll put that like right in front of that stuff. And then once we get it in kind of like that far, it's going to stop. It might drop all the way in if you get lucky enough. Make sure we're perfectly flat here. Okay, I'm not pressing in this really hard because I don't want to force it in there. But a lot of times when I take my sear spring screwdriver, a little flat tip, and I rotate this guy back and forth, it'll pop right in the rest of the way. So you heard that click down into place and everything. You can see straight through your hole. Okay, minus the little spring in there. That's in there perfect. Now what I want to do is I want to get my takedown lever in there before this falls out. So on your takedown lever, you got a little flat here on the bottom. Okay, this is made to go over the spring in that hole, just like that. So say this is my spring. Say this is my spring right here. It's going to go over that spring, and as we rotate it, it's going to push that spring down, and then the takedown lever can get by it. Okay, you can't just put this in the hole and smash it forward because that spring is going to stop it. So we need to rotate this to move that spring down, and then we can push this in. Okay. So again, while we're holding on our locking insert, our spring is here on the bottom, pretty much horizontal on the bottom. So we want that horizontal notch to go right like that. Let's see if I can get some light in here. Zoom in, you can see that. See how that spring is underneath the takedown lever notch? And then when I rotate that takedown lever, it's going to push that spring down, and then my takedown lever will go right by it. Hopefully. I don't know, I had a hard time getting the takedown lever in on this one for some reason. There you go. So be careful when you're putting this in there. You don't want to like smash it up against the side of the frame and rotate it. There's like a hair of gap in between the two. And if you're pushing in too hard and everything and you rotate it, you'll get a little bit of a ring from the contact between the lever and the frame. And you don't really want to look at that for the whole time you own this thing. So once our takedown lever's in there, our lock-in insert's in there, none of this stuff is going anywhere. Okay, now we can mess around with putting the rest of this back portion together. Next, we'll put our trigger bar on. So we're going to kind of get our trigger bar up into place there where it's resting against our hammer pivot pin. Okay, and again, if you need to adjust any of that, you can still push it from this side. Push it in a little bit so we got a little bit more real estate underneath it. Just like that. Okay. And then our trigger bar only goes in one way. Remember, it was pointed up towards the top. The longer leg goes towards the grip. And it's kind of got this little hook in. You got to put that in first. Okay. And then we're going to grab this other end. I'm going to hold it upside down so my trigger bar kind of stays down. I can even hold it with my finger, I guess. And I'm going to hook in that other end of my trigger bar just like that. Okay. At this point here, I'd kind of do a little function check to make sure kind of everything's working at this point. So we can pull our hammer back. It locks back into place. Hold it with your thumb. Pull your trigger. It releases the hammer. Everything's working fine. There's tons of tension on our hammer there, so we know that's all good to go as well. So everything else is looking very good at this point. Let's put together our manual safety. So we have the one side with the threaded hole. Okay, this goes on the right side of the firearm. So again, put some grease all on this pivot pin or in the hole here. And then we'll put that right in there. Just like that. Okay. We'll hold that with our finger as we flip it over to this side. We kind of want to push it up. Remember we had it on when we disassembled it. And then we'll put this side in here. Same thing, grease. Put that in there. Kind of push that up. And I'm looking straight through this hole. And I can see the threaded hole on the other side. Kind of trying to line those two up. Okay. Then we'll take our spring here. I'm going to put that on our post right here. I'm going to put that loop lined up with the hole that the pin's going to go through right here. And then this pin has a little bit of a notch right where my lighting is really not great today for some reason. It has this notch right here. Sometimes that spring likes to get caught in there, so you got to kind of really stab this through there at an angle. And once the spring gets by there, push it all the way through. You'll feel it hit the other side. So we'll put our bolt in here at an angle. Kind of stab it through like I said. Now it's past that groove. Okay. I'm going to continue to slide it in. Maybe I'm not past that groove yet. There, now I'm past the groove. Okay. Now what I do is I kind of look over the top of it and I can see this one's clearly higher than that one. So I'm going to bring that one down kind of even. Push my bolt in. I think I'm right where the threads are. Don't cross thread this stuff. Get my wrench on there. And I can feel it going in. There you go. And all I'm going to do is put this up. Give this a little snug. I'm not cranking that in there like stupid tight. I don't know what the torque spec is on that. So functions check. Manual safety works perfect. Next, we'll install our magwell. Again, there's no screw or anything holding this on, so it just kind of goes right into the grooves there. Just like that. Slides right on. And then we have our little rubber shims right here. So if you're stuck to your grips, fine. Awesome. You ain't got to do really anything but put your grips back on. But if they fell off or you took them off, I usually just kind of use a pair of needle nose, get it situated kind of where it needs to be. Then use my flat tip screwdriver to kind of get it on there flat, just like that. And on this side grip, we need to go underneath our slide catch. Now on these here, there's no O-ring, there's no like a star washer or anything like that. It's just Loctite, okay? So we're going to go underneath our slide catch lever and then just slowly put it down into place. Get our screw started. Our torque spec on our screws is 13 inch-pounds. And before I forget, if you took your trigger shoe off, our torque spec on that is 15 inch-pounds. So these don't need to be cranked in there, okay? The threads for the screws are part of the frame. It's not an insert that goes into the frame. So if you rip the threads out of there, I'm not sure what you're going to do at that point. Got to send it back to SIG and see if they can fix it. But then we'll put our other rubber shim in over here, same way. Get my screwdriver, kind of get it centered and flat. This one can just drop right down on there. Just like that. Snug these up a little bit. T10, 13 inch-pounds. There you go, just like that. All we have left is to reinstall our slide. Make sure our takedown lever is down. And then when we're sliding our slide back, we're going to make sure that our safety lever is down. Here's my tool right here. This little safety lever here loves to be in the up position like this, so it collides with the back of your slide. Leaves a nice little mark there. So make sure that that's down as we slide that over. Push our slide catch up, lock our slide to the rear, rotate our takedown lever, release our slide, push our takedown lever up, and then push our pin all the way back through. Okay? And there you go. Now you can readjust your trigger and everything and get all those back to where you want it. My other video shows how to make the adjustments to this trigger system as well. So let's talk about our magazine really quick before we end this video. It doesn't have the little detent in the center like we're normally used to on the floor plate. It's got this little retainer here in the back. So basically we pull that down so it clears our base pad. Okay. So we do that, we can push our base pad forward over it, just like that. We're going to hold this down with our thumb as we pull this off. It's got a lot of spring tension, so don't let that go. You can pull this all the way out. There's our follower, our spring, and that retaining clip. Basically put it back in opposite procedure. We're going to push this all the way down. We're going to have that retainer part sticking out. We're going to hold it with our thumb, or excuse me, our finger, and then start to slide on our base pad. Now your grooves for your base pad are about halfway up. Okay, so you kind of think that this ledge here is going to be against here, and you're going to be fighting and fighting and fighting. It's not there. Okay, it's about halfway up, like I said. See it over here? The groove that the magazine goes in into the base pad. So we'll kind of hold this forward with our finger as we're pushing our base pad back. And then it'll clip right up into place. Just like that. And there you go. That's how to disassemble and reassemble your magazines. And there you have it. That's how to disassemble and reassemble our new 226 X5 Legion. It's the same for all the other X series pistols as well. The STAS and the more classic looking one. So if you're interested in any of these tools, they're all available on SIGguy.com. We have the deluxe kit like I talked about. This is one of everything from the other three kits. We have a 365 kit, a 320 kit, and a classic kit. So this is one thing out of all three of those kits all put together. So you only need one kit and that's it. If you don't have a 365 or a 320 and you just want a classic kit, this here is in the classic kit. The two punches we use, the pin alignment tools, and our sear spring screwdriver. Okay. And then obviously you want the half punch as well for our firing pin, retaining pin, and our extractor retaining pin. Okay. There's tons of stuff on SIGguy.com, all kinds of upgrades and factory parts. If any of these pieces you need to replace, check out the webpage. 9 times out of 10 they're going to be on there. And we also just added the Cool Fire trainer kits to our website. So where winter's coming along and you might not be out firing and practicing at the range as much as you used to unless you go to an indoor range, that's a good alternative to winter time, and it's very fun. I mean, once I start messing around with it, it's hard to put it down, especially if you're competing with family members and stuff. So Cool Fire training is really cool. Those are on the website as well. So if you like this type of content, there'll be a subscribe button right down here in the corner. If you could subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day.